Good morning, and thank you very much for your time and attention. On behalf of our nonprofit, the Canadian PKU and Allied Disorders Association, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us, either in person or watching from your offices, and especially to MPP Michael Harris for enabling us to be here today. We'd like to thank the members of the PKU community who have come from across the province of Ontario to ensure that our voice is heard by the members of the legislature. We have a whole gallery full of people here living with PKU. I'm John Adams, and I'm a founder and the president of the Canadian PKU Association, or CanPKU, and I'm joined by my son today, John W. Adams, who's in the gallery, who lives with PKU, as well as his sister, Michelle. Also here is one of my fellow co-founders of the association, Christian Bagoria, and his beautiful daughter, Candy, who also is living with PKU. We hope and expect that the other founder of CanPKU will be coming momentarily. That's Tatiana Dosu and her son, Radu, who is late diagnosed with PKU. And if you've never seen a person who is late diagnosed with PKU, meeting Radu is an eye-opening experience. Together, we're here to represent the children, the teenagers, and the adults who are affected by PKU and their families. To my right is a poster of people who have given consent. These are a selection of people of all ages, from young children to older adults, who are living with PKU and looking to their government to overcome a problem today. First, a little bit about PKU. Phenylketonuria, or phenylalanine hydroxylase enzyme deficiency for the scientifically perfect, or PKU, is a rare brain-threatening disorder. It's not life-threatening, it's only brain-threatening, where the body is unable to process an amino acid called phenylalanine, or Phe for short, which is an essential amino acid found in dietary protein. People with PKU will not be going to the beef barbecue at lunch today on the lawn of Queen's Park. The result is a buildup of Phe in the blood that is toxic to the brain. Not instantly toxic, but incrementally, slowly poisons the brain. And if untreated or not adequately treated, the symptoms can range from mild cognitive impairment to severe and permanent intellectual disability. This year, in 4 days, on June the 1st, happens to be the 50th anniversary of a government program now called Newborn Screening Ontario, which tests every child born in Ontario on the second day of life for PKU, and now, thankfully, for 28 other genetic diseases. Ontario, in recent years, has shown great leadership in this area, and it all began with PKU 50 years ago. Ontario also provides relatively comprehensive funding for the low-Phe synthetic amino acid formulas in medical foods, which, along with an almost total avoidance of all forms of animal protein, have been the basis of PKU management since the 1960s. However, studies have shown that the majority of PKU patients treated with the diet alone could have Phe levels above recommended limits, which will be toxic for their brain. Tatiana and Christian and I know from experience that the majority of patients, as older children, teens, and adults, cannot fully adhere to what is probably the most restrictive medical diet known to science, leaving the brains of people living with PKU at serious risk. Some good news. In the last 50 years, science has made advances. And in 2010, Health Canada approved the Kuvan, the brand name, or sapropterin dihydrochloride, as the first and only pharmaceutical treatment for this brain-threatening disorder. We're here today to talk about the pills that are in this bottle, Kuvan. Kuvan is proven to reduce the toxic levels of Phe in the blood of patients with PKU when taken in conjunction with the restricted diet formulas in medical foods. So why are we here today? What's wrong with this picture? Number one, the Ontario Public Drug Program did a great job of negotiating on behalf of the taxpayers of Ontario. And every PKU family here is also a taxpayer in Ontario. And they negotiated the best price in the world for this drug. Number two, even though the drug was listed, this is a very unusual situation. All right? We're not here asking for a drug to be listed. This drug is already listed. on the Ontario Public Drug Program. We're asking for access to it because of the problem of restricted criteria. The problem is the listing took place in February of 2013. That's more than 2 years ago. And so far, as of today, not one single patient has access to this drug, even though it's listed. Right? And more about that. What's also wrong with this picture is that every clinic that treats PKU in Ontario wrote a letter to the government, to the drug plan, in March of 2014 saying your access criteria are nonsense and do not work. And here's a bunch of changes we want. There's been nothing but silence and no action by the Ontario Public Drug Program since then. That's laying out the problem, and that's why we're here. We have reached an impasse in discussions with the officials of the Ontario Public Drug Program. And so we're here today to go over their heads and ask the political leadership, ask the Premier, and ask Dr. Eric Hoskins as Minister of Health, who, by the way, is my constituent, and is also my son's constituent, and is also Radu's constituent, are constituents of his. He is our representative here at the legislature. We're asking them to intervene and give direction to the drug plan to cut the red tape and make this drug accessible, this listed drug accessible to the people who have will get a significant clinical benefit. All right, so that's the drug was listed for review on a case-by-case basis, but after 2 years, I emphasize again, not a single patient has access to this drug through the Ontario Drug Program. Why? Because Ontario's highly restrictive criteria are preventing patients from qualifying for public funding for this brain-protecting treatment. And these highly restrictive criteria are not supported by the doctors who know PKU and treat PKU patients. They are not evidence-based. They're an invention of the bureaucracy, one building across the street here, in the Hepburn Block, in the Ministry of Health. The problem is the criteria. The problem was created in the Hepburn Block in the Ontario Ministry of Health, and the solution needs to be in the Ministry of Health of Ontario. Right? Until recently, medical experts had not even been submitting funding applications for their patients because the criteria do not make sense to them. We have copies of the letter they wrote to the government, saying this does not make sense, this does not work. And they know their patients. They're smart people. The specialists who treat PKU and other metabolic disorders are really well-educated people. They can read the Queen's English on the government forms, and they know it doesn't work and their patients won't qualify. However, the first 2 applications have gone in the Ontario program in March, and what was the response? The government wrote back to the doctor, said we need more information. So as it, all right? Unfortunately, the Ontario Public Drug Program has not listed. They've not listened to the doctors who are the specialists in PKU. CAN PKU, our patient support group, has met with the drug program on 3 occasions, in 2012, in 2013, and this year, 2015, just over a month ago. And the Ontario Public Drug Program has not listened to our concerns about the criteria which do not make sense. After more than 2 years, no action has been taken to change the criteria. That's why we're here today. What we have today, in my opinion, and I'm going to use strong language here, is a case of medical malpractice on the part of the Ontario Public Drug Program. These criteria are so bad, they are so intrusive, they have handcuffed and tied the hands of the doctors who know and treat PKU that it amounts to the officials of the Ontario Public Drug Program practicing medicine contrary to law. They're so deep into clinical practice with these criteria, they have no business being there. This is why we're here today, to ask for support from the elected officials of all parties, I stress, who have influenced and direct health policy to ensure this government stops harming and starts protecting the brains of PKU patients in this province who can benefit. We're talking about protecting the brains of about 150 people. We are an orphan disease. We don't have thousands of people who will be affected by this. We have 150 people that we believe will have a strong clinical benefit from access to this drug. PKU affects approximately 600 Ontarians, roughly half of whom, based on clinical evidence, would respond to Kuvan. The drug does not work for everybody with PKU. It works for some. About half of these individuals can access Kuvan, this drug, through private insurance. So we're talking about the responders who do not have access to private insurance. We're talking about drawing attention to the inequity of two-tier health care when it comes. If you've got private insurance, you can get Kuvan. If you don't have private insurance, you can't, under the criteria. As recently as last week, the Ontario Public Drug Program confirmed that patients must continue to wait even longer as yet a third interprovincial review of Kuvan takes place. While most developing countries around the world are funding this treatment for the health needs of people with PKU, this inequity is beyond comprehension. The further delay is unacceptable and is a direct threat to the brain health and well-being of 150 people in Ontario. We have a right to be impatient. As well, Kuvan, as part of another inequity, Kuvan has been funded by the Ontario government for another rare disorder without any restrictive access criteria. And the drug, Kuvan, has not been approved by Health Canada for that disease. It's an ultra-rare disease. I'm glad those patients are getting this treatment, but we have the hypocrisy of the fact that we're supposed to go through a third round of evidence review for the drug, for the disease for which Health Canada has approved this drug, and there are no criteria. There's easy access to this drug for another disease that has not been approved by Health Canada and has not gone through the interprovincial evidence review process. This is unbelievable hypocrisy. Ontario must act immediately to stop harming and start protecting the brains of children and adults living with PKU. The solution is simple and evidence-based. Follow the guidance of PKU medical experts right here in Ontario and worldwide, and rewrite the criteria immediately for Kuvan to finally be made accessible to all the patients who will respond to it. And the government knows who these patients are, because the response, the clinical response to Kuvan, is determined by a trial that is funded by the drug company, not funded by the taxpayer, funded by the drug company, and is monitored by the PKU specialist physicians. Only those who respond to Kuvan will apply for public reimbursement to continue this therapy. But the longer the Ontario government takes to change the restrictive criteria for Kuvan, the longer the brains of these patients remain needlessly at risk. 5 years, Health Canada approved this drug 5 years ago. 5 years is too long to deny patients access to the first and only drug approved for PKU. 2 years is too long for the Ontario government to hide behind unethically restrictive funding criteria. What is the real-world, real-life impact? The ramifications of these restrictive criteria has had and will continue to have very real impacts on the lives of Ontarians living with PKU. And we're fortunate to have some of those individuals here in the room today. My son, John Adams, age 28, is here, and he has been on Kuvan for almost 8 years, having started first in a clinical trial and continued on compassionate access basis by the manufacturer. He is a complete responder to this drug, meaning he receives incredible clinical benefits from this drug. While in high school and university, he struggled with his studies. He was diagnosed with a learning disability, but the medication which came to him in the latter years of university allowed him to excel academically, to thrive as a young adult, to become a real estate agent, and maybe soon to the career of his choice, to become a life-saving firefighter. Without Kuvan, John could not reach his potential with his education and his professional pursuits, preventing him from becoming a fully contributing member to society and taxpayer. The drug has virtually eliminated his learning disability that he struggled with throughout his years in school. If John's access, compassionate access from the manufacturer were to end, he'd be forced to go off treatment because he doesn't have private insurance, and it is likely he would not qualify under this very restrictive criteria. At the opposite end of the spectrum is Tatiana's son, Radu, who was late diagnosed with PKU in his native Romania. Radu faced tremendous challenges of unregulated Phe levels during the first years of his life and exhibited extremely erratic and bizarre behavior. By the time he was diagnosed with PKU here in Canada, Radu's brain had been sustained irreversible damage. He remains severely mentally affected today at age 25, despite the Phe-restricted diet. He cannot be left alone. Radu is on Kuvan now, and his mother and primary caregiver, Tatiana, experiences firsthand the notable improvements in his behavior while on Kuvan treatment. Radu's story, contrasted with my own son's, reaffirms the importance of early detection and sustained treatment of all available tools to enable brains to develop properly. And finally, there's a beautiful young woman, Candy Biagoria, the 14-year-old daughter of Paola and Christian. Christian is also one of the founders of CAN-PKU, who has experienced positive impact of Kuvan on her brain development and her performance at school. Her parents and teachers were amazed by the change they saw in Candy once she started taking the medication, and they continued to notice remarkable improvements with her focus, attention, and ability to work independently. Candy also receives Kuvan on a compassionate basis from the drug manufacturer and would not meet the government's restrictive criteria if she should need to turn to public funding to access Kuvan. Not everybody, not every family in this province is blessed to have private insurance for prescription drugs. We're here to draw attention to the unmet needs of the families that don't have private insurance for Kuvan. Though the Ontario government should be applauded, and we do, for negotiating the best price in the world for this drug, they should be ashamed for instituting the worst criteria for patient access to the best care. Today, this government has an important decision to make. Will it continue to harm the brains of Ontarians who have the genetic misfortune of being born with this metabolic disorder by restricting access to Kuvan? Or will it heed the advice of medical experts and protect PKU patients' brains from toxic levels of dietary protein by expanding the reimbursement criteria? By doing so, there will be the added benefits of reducing the burden on Ontario families, on the Ontario healthcare system, and on the Ontario education systems, and will allow PKU patients to reach their full potential and to better contribute to society. This past February, Minister Eric Hoskins released his Patients First Action Plan, which prominently displays the word access on the cover. In fact, on page 5 of this document, it says providing faster access to the right care is identified as a key objective. But the circumstances of PKU families before you today clearly demonstrate that this is not the case in the matter of Kuvan access and for PKU. In this province, only some patients come first for some things. The unfortunate reality is that patients with rare disorders who need access to life-altering treatments seem to be coming in last. We are the orphans of the healthcare system in Ontario. So we urge Premier Kathleen Wynne and Health Minister Dr. Eric Hoskins to insist that their officials in the Ontario Public Program cut the bureaucratic red tape so that 150 PKU patients can benefit from access to Kuvan. Thank you for listening. I'm now going to turn over the podium to MPP Michael Harris, who's here today to support our efforts, and we thank him for that, and those of the other patient groups who've had no choice but to repeatedly come to this legislature and plead, and we're here today to plead, for publicly funded access to the medically safe and effective treatments for their specific rare diseases that are unjustly being kept out of reach. Mr. Harris.
Well, thank you, John. The disturbing situation PKU sufferers are forced to endure speaks to the overwhelming need for action on rare disease funding in the province. And after seeing countless patient groups for often life-threatening rare diseases like cystic fibrosis, AHUS, PNH, and IPF forced to come cap in hand to Queen's Park every year to make their plea to government for life-saving and life-transforming medication, the time for action is now. Today, patients with PKU fight for access to a drug proven to protect their brains from this debilitating disease. Now, a full 5 years after the drug was approved by Health Canada and more than 2 years after government committed to fund it, we now hear that in reality, not a single PKU patient has been able to access treatment because funding criteria is too restrictive. Something isn't right. Kevin Dubé, a young father from my riding, rode his bicycle more than 7,300 kilometers coast to coast last summer to draw attention to this rare brain-threatening disorder which affects his 2-year-old niece Avery. Kevin's efforts demonstrate the lengths families have to go for their loved ones and the support that these families receive from all across the province and our country. Unfortunately, this government is not showing the same support to their constituents in need, especially those struggling with rare disease. Instead of dealing with the larger problem of how our healthcare system funds drugs for these rare diseases, we have seen time and again government offering little more than stopgap measures, usually only once public pressure is applied, neglecting long-term life-saving solutions. Often the solution we hear from a government is Ontario's compassionate review policy, which means patients need to wait until their health regresses to the extent that they are urgently hospitalized due to an immediate life, limb, or organ-threatening complication related to their disease. So patients are actually forced to wait until they're literally at death's door before they can even qualify for the necessary treatment. And even when or then it is only for a temporary period with no confirmation past 6 months. For some patients, like those with PKU, whose health declines outside of hospital, this policy doesn't even apply. Given we just saw a budget tabled that didn't include any mention of rare disease funding, I am growing more and more concerned. The fact that these people are here today reaffirms that this problem is not going away. That is why today I will be asking my colleagues in the legislature to support a select committee to review funding for rare diseases in Ontario and hear from experts and patients as to how we can make their lives better here in Ontario. I thank you for your time and be happy to answer any questions as I'm sure John will as well.
John, what does this drug cost? And I'm aware of the fact that it's part of a huge, bigger problem that we see all the time here.
Okay.
So what does this drug cost, and how have they, what's the problem with the access criteria?
Okay.
Without getting,
Two different questions. Happy to answer them. In Canadian dollar terms, the start point for the negotiations, my understanding was for the typical patient, $100,000. I'm happy, as a taxpayer in Ontario, I'm happy to report that, officially the product listing agreement, the government keeps it confidential. I know too much. I know how to connect the dots. They got it down to $70,000. All right. So and I need to explain and clarify that the dosage is body weight dependent. So the 6-pound newborn baby, it doesn't versus the 280-pound overweight adult. All right. But if you average the size of the human population, the PKU population, that's right. That's right. Approximately $70,000 a year.
Criteria.
And the criteria. Well, I'm happy to go into that. It gets a little technical. No.
Points?
The high points is, they're the only jurisdiction in the world that I know that asks you for clinical evidence of reduction in blood Phe, substantial reduction in blood Phe, 30% or more, and a substantial increase in the tolerance of Phe in your diet. And based upon standardized testing, a substantial improvement in neurocognitive function and or substantial improvement in quality of life. All right, and the problem, from my perspective, with these criteria and with the doctors' criteria, what the doctors have proposed is there's too many things. There's too many ands in there. There's too many hurdles. There's three distinct hurdles: blood Phe, food Phe tolerance, and neurocog improvements. All we needed to. Sorry?
I know I'm not connecting the dots here.
Okay.
So they want you to have all these things, but aren't those things that would only come with the drug, or are these?
Oh yeah,
things
and that's why. Hey, I give the drug program credit where credit's due. They negotiated a 6-month free trial at the cost of the manufacturer, so that the clinics have the opportunity to build this evidence base on a case-by-case basis.
6 months free, and then if it's not working to certain standards, then they cut you off.
That's right. Okay. All right. Or the fortunate ones have been allowed to continue on compassionate access, but there's a limit to when the government's not paying. There's a limit to how many dollars there are available for compassionate access. That's the problem. That's the crisis. All right. The company entered in good faith into a business deal with Ontario for what I say is the best price in the world, and Ontario is not living up to its part of the deal. Unfortunately.
What could a committee do to sort of resolve this problem? Because as Fergie mentioned, there are many groups that come here with rare illnesses and find themselves in the same sort of bureaucratic party and not.
Yeah, far too many times we've seen patient groups, and I listed a few. We all remember Matty Vanstone that came to Queen's Park and had to plead for a drug that would help her live a normal life. She was quite young. Her classmates were fundraising to have her access this drug so that she could live a life normal to theirs. Same thing with folks suffering from PKU. You know, I think a select committee, and we see the results of that through my colleague Christine Elliott's call for the developmental disabilities, mental health. You know, step back, take the politics perhaps out of it, have a bipartisan group study, consult with experts, hear from patient groups, and actually come forward with a list of solutions to actually move this situation forward and get some tangible results. We've been talking about this for far too long, and I think that a select committee to study this would be one of the best tools we have as legislators to hear from Ontarians, patients, experts on how to proceed in the right way.
What does it say, though, about what's supposed to be an independent, expert-driven drug approval process, that you need to create a group of bring a group of politicians together to take the politics out of that process? Like, what's going on there that is not sort of leading to breakthroughs? Are they under too much pressure to save money?
I know John wants to probably chime in on this, but it's not working. It's clearly not working. I mean, a great example was just a month or so ago when patients of AHUS came in, and the day we had the press conference, the night before, we heard the government's announcement that they would start funding it for some patients. So clearly, that is an exact example of how the process that we have currently, perhaps A, isn't working, and B, is politicized. And so we need to stop that from happening. Stop people coming from across Ontario to beg for their lives to be equal to others in Ontario. So a select committee would step back and have the tools necessary to go across the province, hear from experts, the resources, and put forward recommendations that the government could adopt. And John, I don't know if you want to speak to that as well.
Yeah. The claim is that the drug coverage decision-making process in Ontario involves experts and is evidence-based. And in the case, I can't speak about every drug and every disease, but I'll speak about PKU and Kuvan. In this case, it's simply not true. Right? In your media kit, you have the letter signed by every clinic in Ontario in March of 2014 saying these criteria are nonsense and they are unworkable. These criteria do not, as treating physicians, these criteria do not make clinical sense to us. I rest my case. Listen, the government needs to listen to those doctors and do more than listen to them, act on the advice they've given. There's a simple solution to the criteria problem. We need to change two words. They say you have to meet A and B and C. And the solution is A or B or C. That's simple. We need to change two words. We said that to the drug program in 2012 when they first showed us the draft criteria. We said it to them in 2013. The doctors all got together and said it to them in 2014 in writing. And we said it to the drug program a month ago, and they weren't listening. And we're saying it here in public to the Premier and to the Minister of Health and to you. Thank you.
I just wanted to
Yeah, go ahead,
ask you,
please.
what other provinces fund this drug for this particular?
Quebec was the first to list this drug, all right, and they have and they also have a very special program of exceptional access, where a doctor can make a case by case. They have to do paperwork, but on behalf of this patient, here's this patient whom I know well. Here's the evidence, and I want you to pay for this drug. There are a half a dozen patients on the drug through that process in Quebec. Saskatchewan did a Me Too, thankfully, with Ontario, so they got the same negotiated price, and they have the same criteria. 5 patients have applied in Saskatchewan, and all have been refused. All right? Now, the other provinces, there's a completely different problem. They have refused to list the drug. All right? All right? So that's Ontario. There was a report that recommended the interprovincial evidence review process known as the Common Drug Review way back in 2010 and again in 2011, looked at the evidence and said, do not list, but there's a very special note attached to that report. And Ontario read that note, and the other provinces didn't read that note. And that note says the drug company and the provinces should have further discussions on ways to find the subset of patients who will get a really good clinical benefit. That's the 6-month free trial. That's what Ontario read that and said, okay, the company offered a month, and Ontario hung tough, and they said, no, we want 6 months. And they hung tough, and they got that. 6 months for free, so we can figure out, get the evidence that there is a substantial clinical benefit that warrants the negotiated discounted price.
Can I ask, Michael, what do you think is, getting back to the point of a systemic review of this ad hoc nature of which orphan drugs get funding and access and others don't, what do you think is the reluctance in the government on this? Is it just because it's a new phenomenon relatively that we're, with advances in pharmacology or pharmaceuticals, that we are getting more drugs like this, these one-offs that can make difference? There's one for Hep C now, there's this, there's the other ones.
Yeah.
So what's the phenomenon we're looking at?
Well, look, policymakers, legislators need to modernize as science and technology does. We are seeing more drugs that will help people suffering from rare diseases in Ontario live a normal life, where years ago perhaps they weren't in place. In some cases, these drugs have been on the market for some time. Let's be honest. Cost is obviously a big factor here. But when I get up and read the paper in the morning and see that we've blown $1 billion in Mississauga to save a few seats on a power plant, or we're blowing billions of dollars on e-health, and the list, I could stand here all day and go on with the list of scandals or waste. To decline people in Ontario, a drug that would allow them to live a normal life is irreprehensible. And so we have to study this, and we have to provide all Ontarians with the same lifestyle that we enjoy. And I think these drugs are doing that, and that's why we can't simply pick winners or losers, or pick who has the best media relations campaign in terms of how we're going to fund these things. We have to treat everyone equally, and that's why a select committee, I think, would reach out, ask those experts, ask the patients, the doctors, etc., on how we best do that in Ontario.
If I might just, I'm also involved with the Canadian Organization for Rare Disorders. That gives me a broader perspective. Let me just note, there are, in round numbers, there are 7,000 rare disorders. And again, in round numbers, there are treatments for fewer than 500 of those rare disorders. So when we have a breakthrough in the scientific discovery process and a disease can move from untreatable to treatable, it's a very big deal. And it leads to cost pressures, no doubt. But it leads to taking a small number of people, in the case of PKU, 150 people in Ontario, to move there. In that case, we had a treatment. PKU was untreatable when I was born. Thank God it became treatable in the 1960s. All right? But we also discovered that the treatment needed to be improved. And now we have an improved form of treatment that works for some patients. Right? We're talking about small numbers of patients, and we're talking about untreatables or poorly treated diseases. And we need more science. We need more research. We need more innovation to meet those unmet medical needs of people. And we need to cut the red tape about getting access. When we have the breakthrough, when we have the evidence, and sometimes the evidence in rare disorders isn't thousands of patients in a randomized control trial. But when we have the available evidence, it's time for the system to respond to the unmet needs of people living with rare disorders.
Can I ask just a more practical follow-up? So what kind of, and maybe it's in here, but if you have PKU, you can't eat protein?
You can't eat meat, you can't eat chicken, you can't eat fish, you can't drink milk, you can't have yogurt, you can't have lentils, you can't have nuts. Everything that you consider drinking or eating could potentially harm your brain if it has this amino acid in it, all right, which it occurs in dietary protein. All right, so it's a vegan diet without protein. That's right. It's a vegan. That's why I say it's the strictest diet known to medical science. All right. There are some other amino acid disorders that require an equally strict diet. I don't want to say it's the only one, but they're even rarer than PKU. All right. So
it's not even a vegan diet, really.
No, and you can't live without protein. So the breakthrough 60 years ago was to be able to formulate a synthetic version of protein in an amino acid formula. But it's different. It's not natural protein. It's not complete protein. The body processes differently.
People with PKU take, is that what that is?
They take. Okay, PKUers. How many of you take your formula multi-times a day? Hands up. Okay, the synthetic protein. All right. We have adults here and children. All right. So, and Not very good, in my opinion, but I'll leave it there. It's gotten better.
Oh, Rob's got a stamp.
Here. Would you like the
Here's-
PKU
yeah.
formula taste stamp, brother?
Rob will have that he'll have that for lunch.
You know, Steve Paikin once had me on his show, and I didn't prep him, and I challenged him to take the PKU formula taste test. He had to go off camera after he because he didn't want to swallow what he had in his mouth.
Jeez.
All right, yeah. Steve's never had me back on the program, right?
Carry to school everywhere.
Right. And how much is that? How much does that cost? That stuff.
Oh, we're running typically $10,000 a year in ballpark, maybe a little bit more now. And then there are special low protein, low phenylalanine foods, medical foods, which are 10 times the cost of. There's low phenylalanine, low protein bread. It costs 10 times the amount of a loaf of bread. The government does a pretty good job of paying for these other special medical dietary products. All right, I want to give credit where credit's due.
So taxpayers, in a sense, are paying up for all these other things that people need. So what would be the annual spread? Like if it cost if it costs $70,000 a year for the average for what's it called, Kuvan?
Yeah.
On average. But taxpayers are already spending maybe what, 20,000 on formula and bread
low protein, the special medical foods. Yes.
So what's the net?
the net?
Yeah.
Each patient's response is different. I mean, each kind of PKU is. That's why you're under close supervision of a medical team. I mean, the diet, you're not left to your own. This is a very difficult diet. You're not left on your own. And you're constantly doing blood tests, and depending on the feed level, you're tweaking the diet. There's a close interaction between the patient, the patient's family, and the clinic. And we're very thankful that we have teams of experts in 5 centers across Ontario.
The monitoring you have to do if you're a diabetic, or is it more involved?
It's more involved. And unfortunately, we don't have the glucometer that a diabetic can have and get a result in seconds. We have to send a blood test off to a lab, and if you get a result in a week, you're doing well. And who remembers what they were eating a week ago? All right, that's all right. So,
well, thanks, guys. I know
thanks.
they were getting off the question period. They'll probably be available after or even here now.
Right.
So thank you for coming. Thank you for watching, and
thank you, guys.
stay
And
tuned.
we'll see you after question period.
Yeah,
All right.
don't forget your
By
coupon.
the way, some of you may remember, I was last here 10 years ago to hold the government's feet to the fire on the problems in the newborn screening program. Made great, with media support and political support, made great advances, and the government, to their credit, we're now, in the beginning, we started with just PKU, now we're doing for 29 rare genetic disorders. I'm very grateful for that. So my point is, I only come here to give the government shit once every 10 years. Okay. All right.